Hello everyone, Drew Wilson of Your Era Gamer here. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. As you can tell, the table is back, and you might be able to deduce that it's probably going to be show and tell time, and that's exactly what's going to be happening this time around. A little bit of a weird time of the year for me to do this, but I haven't been able to get to this particular video until now. But yeah, just something I am correcting right now. And you'll probably have noticed that I did a retrospective of PlayStation 3 titles I played throughout 2023. And then there was also the Xbox 360 retrospective throughout 2023. But the weird thing was, I never got to a PlayStation 4 retrospective throughout the year of 2023. Well, yes, I am finally changing that. So without further ado, let's check out what I played throughout last year. The first title, I thought, hey, I might be able to get to a good start with this with the PlayStation 4 because I've never played any PlayStation 4 titles up until last year. So I thought I was starting off pretty good with a game, and that is Destiny. And this was not the start I was expecting at all. So for those of you who remember, I was trying to get this game to run, and I did everything to try and get this game to run. Everything updated successfully, everything downloaded successfully, everything was fine. Internet connection was fine, but for whatever reason, I could not for the life of me get this game to work. And as a result, I tried waiting a few days. I tried, connecting to the game servers anyway. And I looked up videos of this game, and it was something that could very easily be pulled off as a single player game. And honestly, I don't know why the developers felt that you needed a constant internet connection just to play what amounted to a single player game. But they demanded it, and no matter what I did, could not get this game to function. So I ended up giving this one of the rarest scores I've ever given a game, and that was a 0. And I honestly couldn't recommend this game because this, for me, ended up being a glorified drink coaster. So I tried to keep my spirits up and, assume that that was just an anomaly. And throughout the rest of the year, luckily, yes, this was indeed an anomaly. So I continued on with another game, Call of Duty Black Ops 3. And I have not the greatest history with this franchise. I've played numerous Call of Duty games and end up being mediocre experiences, like cheaply put together games, basically throwaway titles in the end. And I got to this game thinking this is probably going to not be an exception to that, and it ended up being a little bit more interesting than I was expecting. There's like special capabilities you could use. You could send nanites to take out enemies. You could light them on fire and using technology, sci-fi stuff. And it ended up being a little bit more interesting than I was expecting. And yeah, the level design left a bit to be desired, but otherwise, ended up being an okay game, which for someone like me, that's actually pretty high praise. I then moved on to another game, and I thought the series up to this point was, decent. I wouldn't say it was amazing necessarily, and some people would disagree with me on that, but I ended up playing Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. And I didn't have the highest expectations. I thought it was just going to be a okay game in the end, just like the other titles. But this one surprised me in a good way. I actually thought the level design was improved. There were new elements introduced, and it ended up being a surprisingly good game in the end. So I thought, you know what? Hey, I'm open to recommending games that ended up being good, and this is definitely my first recommendation for sure. I then moved on to another game that I had good experience with the franchise. And so I was happily able to dive into Borderlands 3. And this one pretty much matched my expectations. It ended up being a really good game. It had all the elements that made the previous games great, and introduced some interesting elements as well. And I generally thoroughly enjoyed it. Sure, it was a little heavy on the advertising for his DLC, but other than that, like, there's not much to complain about with this game. So, 2 for 2 ended up being another recommendation. So from there, I tried another game that's the franchise was very curious to me. I enjoyed the previous games; they were very enjoyable. Some of them ended up being great games. So I was wondering why it abruptly ended the way it did, and so I got into playing Just Cause 4. And a lot of critics were saying like this is a disappointment. A lot of what made the original game great was not here, and I am actually inclined to agree with the critics on this one. A lot of the destructive elements that really made the previous games tick, missing in action in this one. I ended up like enjoying like the stunts, the sky stunts and stuff like that. But honestly, it wasn't enough to really save this game. And sure, it had some interesting elements with like weather systems and stuff like that. But yeah, it just was not enough to save this game. So a pretty big disappointment to me as far as I'm concerned. I then moved on to another game that is probably one of the most well-known games on the PlayStation 4. And that, of course, was Horizon Zero Dawn. And I, again, agree with the critics on this one. This was a very enjoyable game. It had an open world. It allowed players to be creative with taking down like enemies, and it had a very unique look and feel overall. And I ended up having so much fun. I actually almost 100% completed the game. I think I was missing 1 or 2 batteries for the armor, and that's with the expanded content. So I ended up having a lot of fun with this game, and as a result, I would definitely recommend this game in the end. After that, I tried another game, and this one was an interesting one because a lot of people highly praised the previous game, and I only thought it was kind of mediocre, nothing, not too big of a deal. But I went ahead and played it anyway just to see, because a lot of people were disappointed with this game, and that of course was The Last of Us Part 2. And this is a game that is very story driven, very narrative driven, and honestly, you would think that would be the highlight of the game, and it was not. It really dragged this game down with how badly written it was. And I'm not talking about LGBT content and that sort of thing. I'm okay with it either way. It was just the way it was written. The pacing was just bizarre and it ended up dragging in the end. And when I was playing this game, I thought maybe the storyline, at first I thought the storyline was going to be the only weak part in this, because I think it was Day One Seattle where you could explore and check out different areas of the level, and it was almost an open world exploration game, and I thought that was really cool. But the further along I got in this game, the worse the level design ended up being, and by the time I got to the end of it, it really felt like I was playing a very cheaply put together game. Like, what a difference between the first part of the game and the last part of the game. It was really bizarre. So yeah, I'm with a lot of other people here. I don't necessarily recommend this game. Had some interesting elements at the beginning, but just was a huge letdown in the end. I then went on to another game. Had some pretty good experience with this franchise, so I thought there was no harm in playing this one. And that, of course, was LittleBigPlanet 3. And the main campaign for single player, yeah, it was very, very short. What was there was kind of decent. There was some interesting ideas. But beyond that, there was not much to show for this game. And I know some people might be saying, oh, you should have checked out the multiplayer content, the online content, that sort of thing. Well, unfortunately, despite this being a pretty new game compared to a lot of other games I've played so far, the servers have already shut down. So even if you wanted to try the multiplayer online content, you can't now. And that happened between when I was first playing this and this particular recording. So it's very unfortunate. It ended up being a pretty mediocre experience in the end because of all that. this next one was interesting. I didn't know anything about this particular game. I just heard of the title and thought, oh, there might have been something to this, and maybe I thought it could be a cult classic or something like that, but I just didn't know anything about it. And that, of course, was Detroit Become Human. And let's just say it is a glorified interactive visual novel in the end. A lot of the elements that could have been interesting end up getting relegated to like quick time button pressing events. And yeah, there was some gameplay elements associated with this, but it just was not the greatest experience. So yeah, in the end, I wouldn't personally recommend that title at all. After that, I tried another game, and I honestly didn't have the highest expectations for this one because my experience with the franchise earlier on. And that was Battlefield Hardline. And the Bad Company 2 was pretty decent. Bad Company 1 was pretty decent. It was a little bit better than Bad Company 2, but after that, the franchise really lingered and went into like this, like Battlefield 3 and 4 were just mundane, boring, nothing too exciting. It was just cheap titles, and I didn't have the highest expectations for this game. And this game took the series into a very interesting direction. You're no longer on the battlefield, rather you are playing cops and stuff like that, and you could arrest people, and it had some interesting elements thrown into it, just kind of reimagining for the franchise, the first-person shooter genre. And yeah, it did borrow heavily from the Far Cry franchise, but it did end up being pretty refreshing anyway, despite it being perhaps a bit on the derivative side of things. But still ended up being fairly enjoyable, and I would have recommended this game had it not been for several bugs in the game. And the biggest one is in episode 8. If you died on the airstrip, you had to restart the whole episode. And that includes unskippable cutscenes and all of that. And because of that, like if you died, you got the game to hang essentially. And there was some other bugs as well, but it had a lot of promise. It still ended up being a pretty good game, but maybe a little bit short and pretty buggy in the end. So buyer beware on that one. And finally, I ended this series on another game that I didn't know anything about. I heard of it, but I didn't know anything about it, and that was The Order 1886. And although it had a cool steampunk aesthetic to it, and the writing was kind of interesting, this ended up being a pretty cheap game. The level design just wasn't there, and there was just not much going for this game, so not necessarily a game I personally, recommend at all. So this was my selection throughout 2023. Hopefully I was kind of on track with some of these games, and but if I had to make some recommendations, well, I do actually have 3 of them. And that, of course, is Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, Borderlands 3, and, of course, no surprise, Horizon Zero Dawn. So these are the recommendations I would have out of this lot. And if I had to pick one as my personal favorite, not a surprise here. That is going to be Horizon Zero Dawn. Great game, very enjoyable, and I was actually kind of sad when I had to stop playing it to start playing other games for the purpose of reviews. So yeah, that was my experience throughout 2023. I wanted to actually hear from you. What did you think of this particular lot? Was I way off base on a lot of these titles, or was I at least on the right track for some of these games? What do you think of my recommendations? Do you think I had great recommendations, or do you think I should have given some other games in this set some more praise than I ended up doing? And let me know if you agree with that Horizon Zero Dawn was your favorite game or not. So I guess that is all for now, and until next time, what is your era?